Okay, guys, so welcome to the CPM podcast. And today we have Nathan with us. Nathan, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Nathan from Hong Kong, and I am currently studying in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And today I'll be talking about Hong Kong and this city that I live in.
So, Nathan, how is Hong Kong during the pandemic?
So here in Hong Kong, I'll say we're doing very well, even though the world has been affected by COVID. And the reason why I think this is because we faced something called SARS back in 2003, and a lot of people
Bro,
were
what is
like,
SARS?
oh, SARS is a disease that is similar to COVID, but it's not as bad. But then Hong Kong was affected by SARS in 2003, and it was like one of the things that happened, and the city was a bit slow during that time. And during COVID, a lot of people learned what they did from SARS because the people who were around were like using the same techniques, like buying masks and just keeping safe and social distancing. So they used the techniques that they learned from SARS during COVID. So our city is doing very well.
And bro, I need to ask this question that there is a misconception about the people who are living in Hong Kong that they are Chinese. So, what do you want to say about that?
I think ethnically we are Chinese, but then Hong Kong people are very different compared to people in China. For one, we speak the language called Cantonese, also known as Guangdonghua, and in China, a lot of people speak Mandarin, also known as Putonghua. So there's that language difference. And I think the culture is very different because a lot of Hong Kong people are like the kind of people who work in finance, and it's a very international city. And in China, it's more local, in my opinion. So it's like Hong Kong people know how to speak a lot more English, and some people in China might not know how to speak like as much English. Like I think Hong Kong people are more developed compared to China, but China is rapidly developing too.
Acha, okay, so bro, do you consider Hong Kong as a country?
Personally, I consider it a city that's part of China,
Okay.
since we're technically known as something called a special administrative region.
Um, so I have heard a lot of times that the property rates in China, in Hong Kong are very high.
Well, here in Hong Kong, property prices are just insane. Like for some young people, they'll need to save up like a lot of money to buy their first house. So it's like $5 million for a place that's like really small, like 500 square feet, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But one problem that we have here of the government is that we have a lot of country parks, but the government doesn't want to like take the land from the country park. It's like there's a lot more country park land than like housing land. And in Hong Kong, a lot of areas, even the so-called suburban areas, have like expensive property. If you're like living in the like city, like in Hong Kong Island, that is like the most expensive because that's like the place where all the rich people live at, especially if they're like working in the banks or the finance, they would like be able to go to work easily. Outside, like if you go a little bit further from the city, it's cheaper, but it's not like super cheap. It's still like super expensive. And the rates are
And
just like getting really high.
and for the audience, one Hong Kong dollar is 10 rupees. I just need to clarify that. Yeah, yeah, you can continue with the point.
Yeah, so basically it's like the suburban places still are like really expensive, even though it's like you might think it's cheaper. It's like it's just crazy the prices. And nowadays, more suburban places are like having more property, like they're trying to develop more stuff, but then the prices are still like really high because like a lot of the developers here are just like making very modern flats and they go for a lot. Honestly speaking, a lot of old flats in Hong Kong are much bigger in size compared to the new flats because a lot of times there's a lot of like constraints and stuff and they want to like maximize the profits they get. So the housing is like a lot smaller.
Okay, so Nathan, this I need to ask this question: that what do you think about the Indian food?
For me personally, I'm a guy who really loves Indian food. And here in Hong Kong, we've got a lot of great
Which is your
Indian
favorite
food.
dish?
For me, honestly speaking, I really like naan bread and tandoori chicken. Like those are my favorites, especially garlic naan. That's like the best thing. I always order every time I eat like Indian cuisine or like similar stuff. It's just something that's an essential. And here in Hong
Like,
Kong,
yeah. So sorry, the people who are vegetarian. So apologies. Yeah, you can continue with the one.
so here in Hong Kong, we actually have a lot of Indians like in the population because for a bunch of my friends, I know they have relatives who live in Hong Kong. And here in Hong Kong, we've got a lot of Indian restaurants. And there's this place called Chongqing Mansion, which is basically like a place that sells a lot of Indian stuff. They've got Indian supermarkets, they've got Indian restaurants, they've got like Indian barbers, and it's a place that a lot of Indians like to go to. And here in Hong Kong, there's just a lot of Indian restaurants because of people coming into the city, and they've been like setting up these restaurants, and it's been a pretty great business for them because a lot of people really enjoy the Indian food, including myself, and there's like a demand for it in my opinion. So the Indian culture here is pretty great.
Um, what about the Indian culture? Any comments on the Indian culture?
I think for the Indian culture here, it's pretty big in my opinion. Like there are various Indian communities because I know from my Indian friends that a lot of them have like relatives living here, and some of them grew up here in Hong Kong. So there's like a prominent Indian population. A lot of Indians like here will often do like restaurant business or do stuff related to cricket or just finance in general. So there are definitely a lot of Indians in the city.
So I was very curious to ask this question that do you guys live with your parents? Because it's in India, it's very normal to live with your parents, and I don't know, in the foreign countries, it's not very. It is not considered a good thing to live with your parents. I don't know. So, what do you want
In
to say about
Hong
that?
So here in Hong Kong, a lot of people will live with their parents. And the reason for this is basically because it's property. Like it's property is hella expensive here. And a lot of people, like young people, can't really afford to like buy a property. And a lot of them just still live with their parents. So it's a really common thing. Like a lot of my friends in university who are like locals here will still live with their parents, or some of them might live in the dormitories, but living with parents here is a very normal kind of thing. And in Chinese culture, parents are like important. And it's like people will often like spend time with their parents. And I've heard the same thing with India too. So
Yeah.
that is a really similar aspect.
So, Nathan, what is the student life in Hong Kong? So, I was very curious about this. That how do you guys like study? Is it your parents' pressure, or you guys want to do something? I don't know. Anything you want to share about the student life in Hong Kong or the education system in Hong Kong?
Sure. I feel like it is a very subjective matter because in Hong Kong, we've got like different education systems. We have the local schools here, which will do this program called DSE, which is a pretty intense program, and the exams will reflect your scores a lot. So if you don't do that well, you might not really like do well in life. You might not even get into university. And there are some schools in Hong Kong, which are the international schools, which do different programs. So some of these schools do A levels, IB, and the American one called AP. And for these programs, I'll say like going to an international school is definitely easier than local school because in international schools they're more like relaxed and they are like more like trying to like teach you more practical things besides like just being study intensive. A lot of the local schools here are like very competitive in my opinion, and I feel like Hong Kong like local culture is kind of competitive with the study because a lot of people want to do well and they want to get into good universities and succeed in life. And in international schools, a lot of people are also very hardworking, but the syllabus is easier for them to get higher scores. So they have that advantage to like succeed from like the higher scores that they get from the exam, since the international school exams are way easier than the local school
Yeah.
exams.
So, okay, so Nathan, tell me about the working life in Hong Kong.
Well, in Hong Kong, I'll say working here is pretty intense because Hong Kong is a very fast city, and oftentimes people will pull over times during like the work hours. But I think this is because people are just really trying to make money because of like the whole property thing. And
Yeah.
it's like the culture is like very like work focused. And Hong Kong is an international finance center. So basically we have a lot of stuff to do with finance, and there's a lot of big companies here, and a lot of people
There is.
often work in these companies, and there's like a lot of overtime culture. And in Hong Kong, one other thing is like the tax here is only around 17%, which is quite low compared to a lot of other countries. And a lot of people, it's like the tax here is cheap, but then like living in the city is expensive. But I've heard this from some people. They said if you have money in Hong Kong, you will live a good life.
So, what is the average income of a person living in Hong Kong?
So in Hong Kong, the median wage is around like, I'll say it's around like 150,000 according to what Google says, but I don't know how accurate this is, but I think that is like the median wage that a lot of people here earn, which is like not enough to buy a property because you need to save up money for like almost like 20 to 30 years just to buy a little flat, which is kind of sad in my opinion.
Okay, so Nathan, whenever we talk about Hong Kong, one thing pops up in our mind, that is Disneyland. So I have never went to Hong Kong personally, but like, why is it so famous in Hong Kong?
Well, in Hong Kong, a lot of people seem to really like the Disney characters. Like you see a lot of Disney merch pop up in like stores. A lot of girls in Hong Kong love to buy Disney phone cases, and Disney has it's like kind of pretty prominent in Hong Kong. So for Hong Kong's Disneyland, it's a place that a lot of people like to go. But it's like after you go there once, you don't need to go there for like another 5 to 10 years unless they like build something new. Like I was recently at Disneyland a while ago with some of my friends, and comparing it to like other Disneys in the world, because I've been to the one in LA with my relatives, Hong Kong's Disney is quite small compared to like Disney in other countries. I think this is also something to do with the land and like how much space we have, but Disneyland is still really popular here in Hong Kong because you don't have a Disneyland in every country. And that's why it's like a
Exactly.
really hyped up place that people like to visit.
Okay, thank you so much, Nathan, for coming in the podcast, coming in the CPM podcast. It was lovely having you.
You're welcome, Chaku. I really enjoyed this podcast. It was a fun podcast.
Thank you so much, guys. Do not forget to like, share, subscribe. See you in the next podcast.
Also, subscribe to Nathan's Bizarre Adventures, my new YouTube channel.